Welcome to Stand in the Gap Today from the American Pastors Network. We proclaim truth in the public square by connecting a biblical worldview and constitutional principles to the most significant news of the day. Simple, careful, and truthful. That's Stand in the Gap Today. Now, here's your host.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this Friday edition of Stand in the Gap Today. I'm Isaac Crockett, and I'll be joined by Sam Rohr, our Stand in the Gap Today host and president of the American Pastors Network. And today we have a special friend returning who's been on here before. Some of you will remember and recognize CIA Station Chief Scott Uehlinger. And Scott, you've served our nation in the military, retired from that in the CIA, and you're still, in my opinion, serving our nation by the great information that you bring. And you go out, you talk to groups. In fact, I encourage any of you who want Scott to come with the defense analysis, security analysis that he does. If you'd ever liked him to speak to your group, feel free to reach out to us, contact us, or contact him directly in social media if you'd like to. We'd be glad to give you his information. But Scott, you've made time to be with us today, and I want to thank you so much for being on with us and for what you are doing even now for our nation.
Well, thanks a lot, Reverend Isaac. I just want to, I want to try to do my part. I think it's modest, but it's just at least what the Lord has empowered me to do right now is to get the word out to people who don't really understand this. People live their day-to-day lives, and this stuff is way too complex to follow themselves, especially when you have a press which is sometimes eager to cover up the mistakes of this administration. It becomes very hard to separate fact from fiction. So anything that the Lord empowers me to do to help illuminate this and help people understand what's happening is a good thing. So I'm glad to be back.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. And, that's the goal of this program, is to take a stand in the gap for truth, and to put the truth out there. As we know, the truth will set us free. And Scott, you mentioned this administration. I know that one of our guests we've had on here several times, Ben Sisney, who's a constitutional attorney, a lawyer with the ACLJ, he talks about things. In fact, he wrote a book with Jordan Sekulow, and they talk about elections have consequences. And it would appear that one of the consequences of the 2020 election is having a Biden-Harris White House, a Biden-Harris presidential administration that by looking at the poll numbers, looking at the economy, looking at our foreign policies, they seem to be weak. And I want to look today at weak leadership, how it brings about wars. I'm not saying that it's their fault what the Taliban has done or what Putin has done directly, but I am saying that weak leadership against those groups, bullies like that, and seems to empower them to come at us even more. And so that's what we want to discuss with you as a person who looks at the securities and strategies of our nation. That's what you've done. So much of your life and career has been spent doing that as a CIA station chief. But Scott, today, of all things, what's going on in Ukraine and Russia really hits close to home to you, not just figuratively, but literally. Could you talk to us about where you were stationed, where you spent some of your time as a CIA station chief, and your wife, and the roots that you have in this part of the world that we've been looking at with all the war and bombings going on?
Sure. I was always, when I entered the CIA in the mid-'90s, which is at a time when supposedly the world was going to be in a post-historical period with no future conflicts and everything was going to be hunky-dory, I was very interested in learning Russian and working against the Russian target, because I have followed that as someone born in '64 who was raised during the Cold War era. And so that became kind of my specialty. So I spent almost all of my CIA career that was overseas, which is more than 12 years, in living in the former Soviet Union. So that would include Estonia, that would include Kosovo, that was the one kind of non-Russian speaking. Azerbaijan in the Caucasus, Tajikistan in Central Asia, all the former Soviet republics. And the last place I served overseas was as chief of station in command of our CIA station in Moldova. Now, Moldova is, people can look at the map, it's showing up a lot on TV now. Moldova is on the western border of Ukraine, to the southwest. If you go to the northwest, you got the Polish border, but Moldova is there. And Moldova, compared to the other countries that border Ukraine, is the only other country that was a former Soviet republic. So although many more people are going to Poland, there are a fair amount of refugees going to Moldova, because Moldova, despite being ethnic Romanian-speaking, were raised as Soviet subjects. So everyone speaks Russian, and I'm sure and all the Ukrainians know that. So some of them preferring to go to Moldova versus Romania, because in Romania they speak a language that's a Romance language, like Italian, and they won't understand it at all. But if they go to Moldova, every Romanian speaker in Moldova also speaks Russian, much like Canada, English, and French. So my wife, I proposed to my wife in Odessa, in Ukraine, and I was married in 2012. And then later on, I came back to the United States with my wife and stepdaughter. She's now in university, and she was 12 when she immigrated. And we still retain some relatives in aunts and uncles, basically, and cousins in Moldova. And so now, of course, Moldova, which is a very small country, it's the size of Maryland, and the people, basically the only thing they produce, the soil is excellent, much like in Ukraine, and they're very renowned for their wine, but it's a poor agricultural country, and the average person probably makes $250 a month. Now, they've been inundated with refugees since this started 2 weeks ago. I don't know how many are in Moldova, but I would say certainly in excess of 100,000. But that is a lot of people to digest for a poor, small country. And so, getting close to home, my wife's cousin has been housing refugees from Ukraine for the past 4 or 5 days now. And I'm sure that he has a lot of friends who are doing the same. And in fact, some of my relatives in the United States are sending me money, which then I'm going to take and send to our cousin over in Moldova, so he can help, to help him with the expenses of housing an entire Ukrainian family in his house.
Scott, can I ask you something here just real quick? We have about a couple minutes left here. Describe just briefly you're doing it a little bit, but the eastern part of Ukraine, more Russian, it's so forth, the western, less. You talked about in terms of languages, but where is there support in Ukraine right now for Russia, if any?
Well, that would be in the eastern parts, and that's the thing. There really isn't. There are the eastern part of Russia, of Ukraine, eastern part of Ukraine. So that would be on the Black Sea, and it would be the areas, the breakaway provinces. Those were kind of, quote, ethnic Russian areas. The reason is because those areas were highly industrialized, and in areas that were highly industrialized, whether it was in Estonia or Ukraine or anywhere else, the Russians preferred to have their own there. So to speak, for 75 years, they had colonists. They would send Russians to Uzbekistan. How would they get them out there? They pay them more money. They give them more social benefits to get them to move to those countries. So because they basically felt more comfortable dealing with fellow Russians than, let's say, an ethnic Uzbek or an ethnic Estonian. So that's what they've done, and so that's the reason why the eastern, very heavy industrial part of Ukraine is dominated by Russian speakers. Now, so one of the big cities under siege over there is Kharkov, or as the Ukrainians would say, Kharkiv, and they've destroyed a lot of that city. But there are people fighting back. The ironic thing is, those are Russian speakers fighting Russian speakers. They're not even Ukrainian speakers. But they don't want to.
That is very interesting.
They don't want to fight. They don't want to be occupied by Russia.
This has been so helpful, Scott, giving so much information from on the ground and from your experience there. We have a lot more questions for you. We're going to take our first break, hear from some of our partners, and come back. I have some questions kind of going in another direction, but there's a lot to talk about. We're going to take our first break.
All across America, parents find themselves considering whether homeschooling might be a viable option for their children during this time of COVID lockdowns and mask mandates. As a homeschooling mom, I'd like to tell you why BJU Press offers you the support and materials you need to give your child a well-rounded education. BJU Press approaches each subject from a biblical worldview perspective. God and His Word aren't just an add-on in Bible class. Rather, our amazing, all-powerful, creative, majestic God is present not only in science and history, but in English, math, reading, music, art, and more. Your children will be challenged and encouraged to seek Him with all their hearts, while learning and growing in wisdom and knowledge. And isn't that what we want for them? Whether you prefer a traditional textbook education, the flexibility of online learning, or a mix and match approach, BJU Press has what you need. Visit their website at bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
For years, faithful Christians formed nonprofit foundations or trusts to preserve their ability to generously give to their favorite causes or ministries, even after their death. The problem? Professional managers, pressure from left-wing agendas, and even family members with opposing views hijacked the original donor intent. This is sad but true. But this subversion of purpose can be prevented. Hello, I'm Sam Rohr of the American Pastors Network, and I'm glad to recommend Capstone Legacy Foundation in Wayne, Pennsylvania, an experienced and capable Christian community foundation, established to help you set up a ministry, a giving structure guaranteed not to be hijacked, or a place you can donate cash or non-cash assets like stocks, bonds, or property. Capstone's designed to help you achieve immediate tax savings and give you needed time to decide how to prayerfully allocate your giving. Contact Capstone at 610-688-8890 or visit them at capstonelegacy.org. We can't deny pain in this life, but we can know that God has a purpose for the adversities we face. Even when we don't see how God can use our current circumstances, we can still believe Him that He has a plan greater and better than anything we could ever imagine. Hello, I'm Sam Rohr with another Stand in the Gap Minute. This week we've looked at how God helps us in times of adversity. We've discovered that God is with us even when He feels distant, that He is at work in the storms of our life, and that God intends good for our lives, and that we can look forward to our heavenly home when this life gets us down. Together, these biblical teachings remind us that there is no one like our God. His power is greater than any problem, and when we rely on His strength, we will lose some battles, but our victory is guaranteed. Discover more at AmericanPastorsNetwork.net.
Do we need to find Noah's Ark? This is Ken Ham, and the Ark Encounter attraction is located in northern Kentucky. We've learned this week it's not likely Noah's Ark is even still around to find. But do we actually need to find the Ark? Well, no. You see, the Bible's history is true even if we never find the remains of the giant ship. And it isn't likely it would convince many people the Bible's true even if we did find it. After all, Jesus said people wouldn't believe if someone rose from the dead, and that's exactly what's happened. Many people already ignore the mountain of evidence for the flood seen in the world's rock layers and fossils. People suppress the truth in unrighteousness and are willingly ignorant. Ultimately, it's a spiritual issue.
Plan your visit to the full-size Noah's Ark attraction in northern Kentucky when you go to AnswersRadio.com. There's so much more to learn by visiting AnswersRadio.com.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap. I'm Isaac Crockett, and our regular host, Sam Rohr. We're here today with our guest and special friend, Scott Uehlinger, retired from the military and as a retired station chief from the CIA. And Scott, we have a lot more questions. I don't know if we'll have time to get through all the questions we have for you, but to pick your brain as a security analyst. But you were talking so much about the region there in Ukraine, Russia, and in particular Moldova, where you used to be stationed as a station chief, and where you have family, your wife and your stepdaughter and different family members, and you bring up a lot of really helpful information. We were talking about, I think Putin really had convinced himself that many people, especially the ethnic Russians in Ukraine, would just come parading him in and bring him in and bring in the glory days. I don't think that's been happening. Maybe you can kind of finish up talking some about that. And maybe also you were just mentioning to us about Moldova and the tie-in there with the Jewish population and things, and any other interesting tidbits before we go on into some other lines of questioning today. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, so this whole debacle represents a huge intelligence failure on the part of Vladimir Putin, okay? A huge miscalculation. Does that mean it's not going to end in, quote, Russian victory, unquote? No. But I'm saying this has been a disaster as far as intelligence is concerned. And why would that be? One, because Putin has absolutely misread the character of the Ukrainian people. Like a lot of dictators who've been in power for a great deal of time, He has surrounded himself. Eventually, there's nothing left but yes men. And so yes men are telling him what he wanted to hear. And if there was somebody who had a dissenting opinion, I think he kept it to himself, much like Saddam Hussein. Everyone just kept their mouth shut. And so so he had convinced himself, drunk of his own wine, and he said, okay, this is what's going to happen. But the problem is that did not happen. So that was failure number one. Failure number two is the misunderstanding of of Ukraine and the character of the Ukrainian people and the capabilities of their military. They have not folded like a house of cards. They have become unified. They have an inspiring leader, and they're not surrendering. And so that is another huge miscalculation on his part. Another miscalculation has been he has totally misunderstood the capabilities of his own military. Now, he's not a military man. He never served in the military. He was a lifelong intelligence officer. And that's another reason why this is not called a war. He calls it a special operation because he's thinking like a spy. But that's the problem. It's not. It's a war. I served both in the Navy and the Reserve, and I have the military side and the intelligence side, which is a little unusual even in the United States. He has only the intelligence side. And so he had convinced himself that 14 years of military reforms after the invasion of Georgia in 2008, he was convinced that had turned the Russian military into a very modern, capable force. And it has certain characteristics of that, and it is impressive in some ways. But this invasion has shown the great weaknesses of the Russian military and the fact that corruption, which has always been endemic in the Russian military for hundreds of years, has not been erased by these military reforms. And this corruption has turned around to bite him as far as an inability to resupply his own troops, underperforming units, which are not well led. They're led by basically people who just do what they're told, and in a fast-moving, fluid situation, that's not good. So those are three big main intelligence failures. The last one is he totally misunderstood the reaction or underestimated the ability of the West, which frankly has even taken me by surprise. The West, in particular Germany, has basically scrapped 15 years of a pro-Russian policy and has totally done a 180. It remains to be seen if that's permanent, but has done a 180 in their relations toward Russia and is actively exporting weapons which are being used by the Ukrainian army. So he did not expect that the West would be as unified as this because of the lack of response to his seizure of Crimea and the Eastern Territories in Ukraine in 2014.
Okay,
he thought
Scott,
it would be more of the same.
Scott, that I think that was excellent, what you just said right there. But I want to move from there and pick up on the fact that you're saying Putin is primarily an intelligence guy, not a military strategist, because into that there are some thought that his relationship with China, that China had been fueling thoughts and putting information, not all good information, disinformation, into the mind of Putin on these last months that in fact gave him an overconfidence, supported his move into Ukraine because China thought that it would benefit them. Now, we know we've got relationships. China's got relationships with China to buy their oil and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff happening there, but build together that relationship, Russia, China, which is not supporting the West in sanctions against Russia. What happened there? Did they perhaps contribute to some of this miscalculation by Putin?
That's an excellent point, and it's something I hadn't even really thought of, but we can explore that. The idea that China actually kind of not only supported Putin but almost encouraged him. That is not an unbelievable statement. People have to be reminded the history of Russia-Chinese history is extremely troubled, okay? The two countries came within a hair's breadth of nuclear war in the late 1960s, okay? The Russians and Chinese, despite the fact they were both communists, have been at each other's throats in different periods after the end of World War II. And mind you, no matter what you hear about lifelong friendship, et cetera, which is proclaimed by both China and Russia, right this moment, there are Russian and Chinese nuclear weapons pointed at one another, and never forget that. So what you're saying actually ties in the fact that China is out for itself and Russia is out for itself. Russia fancies itself the senior partner in that bilateral relationship, but believe me, China is the boss there. And China is like, okay, let the Russians think that they're running this, but we're running the show. So it is actually kind of in keeping with the way the Chinese approach strategy, that they would actually almost encourage Putin to overreach, because this is going to hurt Putin. And in the calculation of these people, there's only thing, it's a zero-sum game. If you win something, that means I lose something. There's no such thing as a win-win. There's no such thing as something that benefits both parties. If something is good for you, it is by necessity bad for me. So, in other words, a Russian problem in Ukraine would actually be good for China. It would give China more leverage in a bilateral relationship. And that's certainly what China wants. China wants Russia to be a supplier of natural resources, occasional technology, etc. So a humbled Russia would actually be good for the Chinese. So that's a very interesting proposition right there.
Well, we're looking at China, and or Sam, did you have a follow-up to that, or?
Well, not really, other than the fact that I thank you for commenting in that way, Scott, because that consideration, we happen to think one of the Western problems is that we think binary, meaning it's only one way or the other, which is exactly what you're talking about. But it seems to us, as we've tried to do analysis on this program with Russia, Ukraine, you can't, it's not either one way or the other. There's a lot of factors going on all the same time. The EU, the globalists, they have their objective. There's a reason why they don't mind if Russia's in there with Ukraine. China, you just went through that whole thing. But without understanding some of these complexities, it's really difficult to understand what's going on. So anyways, I appreciate your answer on that.
Well, and Sam and Scott, what you guys are saying brings me back to our own leadership in our nation here. Scott, if you would maybe from a security analyst point of view, compare what we had under Trump with so much going on. I mean, people were worried we were on the verge of all kinds of nuclear war when he was coming into office, what we had under Trump versus what we have right now under a Biden-Harris White House.
And of course, that's
as far as leadership or lack of leadership, maybe.
Right, and that's how. Look, history is literally full of cases where weak leadership incites the worst in human beings and incites conflict. And we've seen that. It is not a coincidence that Putin decided to invade Crimea in 2014 into the Obama administration, and then seeks to complete the job under the Biden administration. Yet, at the same time, the president that was supposedly so friendly with Russia, Donald Trump, nothing was done. Because one can say whatever one wants about the way Trump ran the White House, but the bottom line was, for the first time in like 75 years, he introduced a big question mark in U.S. foreign policy that was very good because it offset our enemies. Our enemies, for once, were not sure what he would do. That was true to a lesser degree under Ronald Reagan. And it was another reason why, because I'm old enough to remember, every liberal said that Reagan was going to start World War III, when actually the man ended the Cold War. And he ended the Cold War because he was strong, because he was willing to call things what they were. When Reagan, in a presidential address, called them the evil empire, called Russia the evil empire, liberals were furious. This man is inciting us to a third world war. However, after the Cold War and after talking to a lot of Russians, when Reagan called out the Soviet Union as an evil empire, that gave the people in Europe who lived in chains hope, because they said, thank the Lord, for once he is saying the truth. He is saying the truth about this society, and now we have hope. And he gave hope to tens of millions of people in Poland, in Hungary, in Russia itself, that they could overturn their governments because he wasn't afraid to call them what they really were. And as Jesus Christ called out demons and people, it's the same kind of thing. You call out the evil for where it is, and evil hates to be recognized. and will scream and foam at the mouth, but then will eventually come out of the person who's demonized.
And Scott, this is exactly right. This is, stand in the gap today. That's our point, is we want to put a light on the truth. We want to shed light on what's going on. So many more things to talk about. We're going to take another time out, and we'll be right back after this on Stand in the Gap today.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to the team that you have working with you. I'll tell you one thing about your show. You accomplish more in less time to advance the gospel and to advance knowledge and understanding of seriously any radio show I know of. So congratulations.
Those kind words from Congressman Michelle Bachmann summarize what our guests say about Stand in the Gap today. This is Sam Rohr. On this program, we bring honest analysis of today's news to you and millions of Americans every day. With a newspaper in one hand and the Word of God in the other, we connect the dots between what's happening and what God says about what's happening in light of the Bible and the Constitution. From the mouths of our co-hosts, all preachers, whether former members of the House of Representatives or an evangelist to a millennial pastor or a senior pastor of 40 years, Stand in the Gap today is here for you. Unique, current, trustworthy. Pray for us. Stand with us financially by going to standinthegapradio.com. When we look around, we can see the devil at work, sure. But more powerfully, we can see our great God at work, and He's moving His plan of redemption ahead right on time. God's Spirit's moving in the hearts of His people, too. Do you sense His hand? If so, we've got a job to do. So let's pray. Let's be truth tellers. Let's help lead people to a genuine return to God. Only true revival can bring peace in times of war and God's blessings in times of judgment. Visit our website at standinthegapradio.com or search on Amazon for our powerful tool specifically designed to equip believers for these days. Order our Return to God Journey Guide, designed for personal training or within small groups or Sunday school classes. This small booklet is made to coordinate with our 11 Principles for National Renewal Stand in the Gap TV series. Learn more about the Return to God Journey Guide by going to standinthegapradio.com or search for it on Amazon.
Here's Twyla Brace with today's Health Freedom Minute.
The virus and the fear-based campaign that turned too many Americans from independent souls to compliant subjects has been a boon to tyrants and profiteering opportunists in and around the White House. Before midterm elections, which the left is currently losing because of tyrannical COVID-19 lockdowns and controls, the administration is taking COVID-19 to the next level, mostly out of view. Don't take my word for it. Look at their new 96-page National COVID-19 Preparedness Plan. It is dated March 2022. They plan to vaccinate the children, target anyone sharing misinformation, and push for masks when the risk of severe disease in the community is high, and let masks be taken off when the risk is low. They want to normalize masking and enforce mandates.
Help us secure health freedom for all. Visit cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today, discussing the pressing issues facing our culture from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Now let's rejoin our host.
Welcome back on this Friday edition. You have your co-host Isaac Crockett here and Sam Rohr, the regular host of our Stand in the Gap today. But we have our special guest, Scott Uehlinger, is on with us, and we've been just really having some very interesting conversations. Scott is retired military and CIA, a CIA station chief over in Russian-speaking areas, as well as Central Asian and all kinds of Middle Eastern places. So a lot of things going on and a lot of things to talk about. But before we go into more, delving into these questions, Tim, our producer behind the scenes here, could you give us some updates about things going on in our ministry and let our listeners know, for example, maybe if somebody's tuning in right now, how they could go and listen to the entire program and other archives and resources that we offer?
Sure, Isaac. Good Friday afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening this afternoon in this great context and this conversation about Russia and Ukraine and everything that's happening around the world. I want to let you know about some things that are happening here at the American Pastors Network, that if you only listen to the radio program or check out the TV program, you're missing an awful lot of the resources that we have here at APN and Stand in the Gap Media. One of the things is we're on social media. Check us out on Facebook. Every Friday you can go and see Facebook Live. Right now over there on Facebook, you'll see the program happening in real time time, and you can check out the program even afterwards too, but that happens on Fridays. But we also have other things posted on our Facebook channel, also our Twitter handle, and we're also on BitChute. So go ahead and check us out on those three platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and BitChute. Those are our social media platforms. Also, we are on YouTube, and we have three great channels. We have Stand in the Gap TV, the American Pastors Network YouTube channel, and Stand in the Gap Radio. Right now on Stand in the Gap TV, which you can see on the American Pastors Network and Stand in the Gap TV YouTube channels, we're highlighting a two-part series about the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast with Michelle Bachman. So go and check that out over there on YouTube, and search and subscribe to be notified when new content is posted. We also encourage you to please pray for this ministry. Nothing happens without prayer. It is the catalyst for ministry. So we encourage you to please pray for us as you think about us. Please pray for the Lord to provide for us financially and for other things, just the things that have to be done around here to make this ministry continue to go forward. Please bathe us in prayer. We appreciate it. Also, if the Lord blesses you through this program, please consider giving financially. No amount too big, no amount too small is too much. Whatever the Lord would put on your heart to give, if you're blessed by this ministry and you want to give back, and as Sam says often, lay up treasure in heaven, please go ahead and consider giving financially as to what the Lord might give you to be able to give to our ministry. All right, Isaac, I'm going to go back to you, and we're going to continue this great discussion about Ukraine and everything going on in Russia over there.
Well, thanks, Tim. And Scott, thanks so much again. You've been a good friend to this program and to our American Pastors Network. And, I've heard you speak in person. You and I have met many times over the years, and you've been on this program quite a few times. And, with your intelligence background plus your military background, it really does give you some very keen insights, as well as just your overall experience in the CIA, flipping different scientists and people. And you're one of those guys that, when we think of the CIA, we often think of, what we see in the movies and things, but so much of our intelligence agencies are really just a bunch of people in buildings in the Washington, D.C. area. But you were part of that tip of the spear out there in the field doing these things, and it just gives you such understanding and history, and then it just really helps us as we look at these different things. If you're listening, I would encourage you to follow Scott on Twitter. And Scott, maybe you can give us your Twitter handle. And if you want to reach out on our social media or contact us, Scott, I know you still do a lot of different speaking engagements and different news things and stuff. So thanks again, Scott, for being on here. And maybe if you wouldn't mind giving your Twitter or some way that people can follow some of this information that you put out on social media or to connect with you.
Right. I can be found on Twitter at Scott Uehlinger at the Station Chief. And what I like to do is I tweet a lot, mostly bringing people's attention to various articles and other people who've written some really outstanding things, particularly about the latest crisis that I've stumbled upon that offer really good comments. So I like to try to introduce a lot of folks who wouldn't have read those kind of, let's say, Twitter feeds and things like that, so they can understand better what's happening. So, I'd appreciate people following me there. And I'm available, as you said, to speak publicly to different organizations if people would be interested in hearing what I have to say about intelligence or international security. As you said, we've been on the radio over the years, several years now. We've been talking about different issues with China and Russia, right? So this is more the same.
Yeah, and you, some of the things that you've predicted that we had to be watching out for could happen at any moment have started happening. And again, going back to this idea, that we said at the beginning, elections have consequences, weak leadership has consequences. The weak leadership in the White House, in the Middle East, it has consequences with what's going on. And any time that bullies see a weakness somewhere, they're going to exploit it. Could you maybe talk to us about some of the problems we're seeing in the Middle East as a result of some of the decisions or bad decisions that the Biden administration has made, and maybe what's causing this, what appears to be a rift between Saudi Arabia and our White House right now?
Right, that's a very good point. Recently, to add further insult to injury, President Biden tried to contact the leaders of the UAE, the Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, and was ignored. Now, why would that be? Well, for one thing, he has not been supportive of our allies. And in fact, by doing, people may recall that there's a war going on in Yemen with the Yemenis lobbing missiles into Saudi Arabia every once in a while, much like what Ukraine's been going through on a smaller scale, but over a longer period of time. And basically, President Biden decided to take the Houthis, basically the terrorists, off of the terrorist watch list. So that is, and basically also refusing to sell military gear to Saudi Arabia to allow them to combat these groups, which are targeting southern Saudi Arabia. So needless to say, the Saudis are somewhat annoyed at the withdrawal of U.S. support. And then the president decides he's going to call this country to ask a favor. Oh, by the way, can you increase oil production? Because the president says, God forbid that I should increase American oil production. It's much better to seek my allies, or even worse, let's talk to an authoritarian regime like Venezuela or Iran, and let's rapidly conclude a totally disastrous Iranian nuke deal in the hopes that Iran will come back into the world community and can supply the United States with oil, because I am adamant about drilling our own oil. So this is another thing that's happening. The U.S. is having to work with Russia to effect an agreement with Iran, and in fact is almost giving away the farm as far as the JCPOA, the Iranian nuke talks, in a desperate attempt to get the Iranians back into the world so they can export oil, ignoring the fact that they're also a huge exporter of world terrorism. But we will turn our back on that because we need gas prices to go lower, because we will not drill our own oil in Alaska or via the Keystone Pipeline.
And Scott, that brings it to the nonsense of the kind of policies that are going on. But I want to bring back into that the Russian involvement, because you mentioned it. But people are finding it hard to believe, but it's coming to fruition right now. I mean, literally in these last days, that Joe Biden had actually worked a deal with Vladimir Putin and asked him to help bring the Iranians to this conclusion, as you're talking about. The same guy that he had said we're going to buy oil from last year when he cut the XL pipeline, and now going back and saying we're not going to buy oil from Russia, which just means U.S. prices go up. And so who's left? Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Iran. The nonsense aspect of this is bizarre, isn't it, Scott? But it actually is creating a security issue in the Middle East because of these policies of Joe Biden, and Russia's right in the middle of them.
That's right, and basically it's basically that the Biden administration has backed the wrong horse. They are absolutely wrong ideologically. They are absolutely wrong in their total approach to foreign policy. So now we have one disaster begets another. We have a disaster in Afghanistan, which perhaps then helps beget this disaster. And now it's further compounded by, well, let's make more of a disaster by extending a hand that should not be extended to Iran or to Venezuela. And then what's going to happen is you're going to increase the instability in the Middle East. And, are we going to have a preemptive attack by Israel on Iran in 6 to 8 months? Because we basically said, okay, all bets are off and you can do what you want. We just want you to pump the oil. I mean, so in other words, it's a losing hand, and we keep on losing, and it keeps on getting worse to the point where, I really think you have to start looking very seriously at the Bible, because these things are not merely the miscalculations of an incompetent administration. It's like there is some greater evil going on here that is very scary. I think there was somebody mentioned something. I think it's 2 Thessalonians. I'm not, you gentlemen would certainly know more than me, but it talks about how, in the end times that there will be basically nonsense happening, where that leadership will be acting in a as if they were mad or something like that. And I start to feel that's the area we're in now. We're in the area now where our leadership is acting as though they were mad.
Yeah, that is so right. I mean, here you're coming from a military and intelligence background, but it seems so obvious. And to those of us listening right now and reading our Bibles, we see so much of this coming together, and it reminds us to look upward and to return to the Lord. here at Stand in the Gap, we keep talking about our nation needs to be renewed. We need American renewal. And we've put together these books on this and a lot of good things about a return to God. And some of you have had that in your churches. We're going to take our final break. We're going to come back with Scott. And we've just so much enjoyed talking to you today, Scott. You've had so much good information. We'll be right back after this break on Stand in the Gap today.
Pearl from Pennsylvania says, I'm a widow, struggling on Social Security. But here's a gift for you for Stand in the Gap. There's no other program like yours. From South Carolina, Leah writes, I'm praying for needed resources, greater audience, and God to further bless you. I get so much from your program. You guys are great. Keep it up. Then David from Junction City, Oregon writes, when I was so down listening to the news, I prayed to God, turned on my radio, and your show came on. You've enlightened my eyes and helped me so very much. I wait up every night for your program on CSN Radio. From around the nation, God is blessing people through this program. Many are standing with us. Will you? Pray and partner financially by signing up for our weekly email and giving online at standinthegapradio.com or by writing us at Stand in the Gap Radio, 83 West Main Street, Elverson, Pennsylvania, 19520.
From the time our children are born until the moment they leave our homes as young adults, Christian parents are given the privilege and responsibility of guiding them into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. All during their growing years, they're influenced by the people and events around them. Sometimes these are out of our control, but many times we can make choices as to how they'll be educated, what church they'll attend, and the overall atmosphere of our home. If you've decided your child is best influenced by a biblical worldview education, you'll want to consider Bob Jones University Press homeschool materials. Dedicated to academic excellence, BJU Press offers a curriculum that not only assists you to pass along your values to your children, but makes it easy and affordable. The decisions your child makes in response to the challenges and opportunities they face in life are largely determined by their inner spiritual compass. Is your child ready for the journey? Find out more at bjupress.com.
This is Tim Barton from Wall Builders with another moment from American history. In 1963, the United States Supreme Court decided that voluntary Bible reading could no longer be part of the school day. Founding Father Benjamin Rush, known as the father of public schools under the Constitution, pointedly warned that the Bible should be read in schools in preference to all other books. He specifically warned that if America ever ceased promoting biblical principles in schools, then we would waste so much time and money in punishing crimes and take so little pains to prevent them. He was right. We now have 7 million Americans in prison, on probation or on parole, and the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Sadly, this was unnecessary, but is the result of no longer teaching the morals of the Bible in schools. For more information about the Founding Fathers' views on the positive impact of the Bible in schools, go to wallbuilders.com.
Well, this is Irony Beyond Parody. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet with The Point. If liberty means anything at all, wrote George Orwell in the original preface to Animal Farm, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. Well, recently, the University of Northampton demonstrated where they stand on this, adding a trigger warning to another iconic Orwell book, 1984. Now students are warned that Orwell's seminal critique of totalitarianism, censorship, and thought control could contain material that some might find offensive and upsetting. For the record, strong evidence suggests that trigger warnings do not prevent feelings of trauma and could even have the opposite effect of heightening emotional vulnerability to scary or offensive content. But on a much deeper level, we're simply walking in the way Orwell warned against. It's the dark side of an expressive individualism devoid of deeper truth. And eventually, embracing an ideology that tells us to create our own reality only leads us to cancel anyone who threatens them. I'm John Stonestreet.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Well, welcome back. And as we finish up this Friday edition of Stand in the Gap today, Sam and I have been talking with retired station chief from CIA station chief Scott Uehlinger, also retired military. Scott, you've shed so much light on what we've been talking about, and by that I mean you've been speaking truth. And when we talk truth, it sheds light. And just as you've explained, we can see this not just theologically, but we see this actually happening in front of us. And everything from you just giving us some of the context of the geography and the culture over there in Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, as well as giving the history between Russia and China and Middle East and some of the current things happening, some of the vacuum that happens when you don't have strong leadership here in America, how it allows these bullies, this axis of evil to come out. Just so much information. And for those of you listening today, you may want to go back and listen to this again, share this with friends, because this has really been great. Sam and Scott, you guys have really put together a lot of good commentary. I think we've had some good questions here. And it's just really helpful to get a good grip on what's going on in the world right now. But Scott, and I know this isn't going to happen, but if somehow you did have the ear of the White House, if somehow you could talk to the people in leadership right now, from your background in the military, from your background in the intelligence, in security and defense and all these things, what advice would you have for us? How do we take a stand? How do we show our strength again? How do we shine the light of truth on the situation that's going on, not just in Ukraine, but all over? What advice would you have if you could talk to the president or to his cabinet or leaders right now?
Right. Well, I think what I would do is I would hearken back to the days of Ronald Reagan, who was an excellent communicator, in that using in an ideal world, what the president of the United States should do, and simply our president is, because of dementia issues, et cetera, is simply incapable of doing this, is to use the bully pulpit of the president to reach out personally to the people of Russia. To basically extend a hand that says, look, we do not hate Russians. We hate your regime, which is performing, atrocities and illegal war acts in another country. And we understand that it is not your fault, and basically things like that, because Donald Trump did that to some degree with Iran. And there is no greater weapon than that. The weapon of ideas and words is better than any military, because it is the one thing that the forces of evil hate more than anything, is to have the light of truth onto them and being shown as their true selves. That is what these dictators and authoritarians, I don't care if they're from North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, or anywhere else, it's what they hate. They hate to be revealed, and it empowers the people to do something about it. Now, right now, by the way, Putin, it's not like, I don't want people to think Putin is going to be overthrown inevitably. Because the problem is, another thing people have to understand is that 80% of Russians' primary and overwhelming source of information is the television, which is state-controlled and has been for 15 to 20 years. So unfortunately, what we have is a thoroughly propagandized Russian population. Now there are, of course, there's always going to be some people with doubts. But an authoritarian government for 20 years is a very strong thing. And there are just too many people who've been beaten down by this authoritarianism, and they're afraid of expressing their opinions or of sticking their neck out. There are a couple of very brave Russians who were arrested protesting the war, and God bless them and their cause. But that is more the exception than the rule. On the other hand, when unfortunately body bags start coming back to Russia and the Russian people and Russian widows and the organization like the Russian Society of Soldiers' Mothers, which is an important civil society organization in Russia, when they start finding out the true cost of this war, then all bets are off. But right now, the Kremlin is controlling the message, and a lot of the Russian people simply want to simply accept that this is the world against Russia. As usual, it's Fortress Russia. I am the only leader who's capable of defending besieged Fortress Russia against the evil forces that surround our country. There are too many people in Russia who still believe that. Too many people who are relatives in Ukraine are calling them saying, okay, the Russian army just destroyed my house and now I'm homeless. And this person's aunt or uncle is saying on the phone with them, I don't believe you. That's not what we're being told in Russia. You're wrong. It's not the Russian army destroying your house. So they're a lot of people are in absolute denial of reality. And it's going to take a while for the Russian people to wake up to that, unfortunately. But these are the kinds of tools a very good world leader would be trying to appeal to the people, to communicate to them directly to try to help the situation.
Scott, that is spot on, and that's what you keep going back to is truth and authority, and ultimately God and His Word. And when you take away from that, and you have a society that's built on corruption and atheism, it's very hard to get through to these people. But what you're saying is so good. So helpful. We just thank you very, very much for making the time to be on with us. Sam, I know that yesterday on the program, you talked with a lawyer from Canada. You talked with a constitutional lawyer from here in the States. We see these same sort of things happening in Canada and even in our own country here, kind of like a regime trying to push us down, tyranny taking over our rights and things like that. And we can just look to Russia, look to China, look to the Middle East to see where that leads the people. And Scott, what you're talking about, this is something we want to avoid, not to embrace. So I know we're coming to the last few minutes of our program here. And Sam, I want you to have time to close this in prayer. But Scott, thank you for the way you've set this up. We really appreciate this, and all of our listeners, I think, are very grateful for this helpful information. But Sam, I'd like to give you a few moments to kind of give any wrap up, as well as maybe any tie-in from yesterday's program of where we see our own North American governments headed, and to what we see going on in other parts of the world.
Well, Isaac, what we talked about yesterday was just to highlight again, and we talk about so much. There are two worldviews, a biblical-centered worldview that God is and God created, and from that came certain things, including God-given rights. And then there's a worldview without God, where we are evolved and life is not of value, and God becomes government, and it can do whatever it wants to its people. That leads always to totalitarianism. This is what we're seeing worked out before us right now. And like we talked about yesterday, Isaac, it's just for people to know. There are, as you said, there are consequences to elections. Well, there are consequences to choices of what one believes. And all of these things that we are talking about here today, the aggression from China, the aggression from Iran, the aggression from the globalists, the inconsistent policies coming out of our own Washington are coming out of the heads of people who have really said, by their own words, who is God? We're God. And they've thrown that to the side. The only antidote to that is what we say, and what Scott talked about, is truth. That's why we say regularly on here, there is a specific reason we say decide to pursue the truth, to embrace the truth, and then to stand in the gap for truth. Truth is powerful, but it's only not the truth as I want to make it, but as God has detailed it in His Word. That's what we're saying. And and Isaac, you mentioned it. We have a book that the people can find on Amazon or on our website, AmericanPastorsNetwork.net, and that is our Return to God Journey Guide, which has the 11 principles in it that we've dealt with on this program, and Isaac and you and I have dealt with in 22 30-minute TV, Stand in the Gap TV programs that are made to coordinate with this booklet. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get a perspective on what is biblical worldview and the foundational truths that lead to good policy and government that yields God's blessings, you go and pursue this. Go online. You can get it from Amazon or on our website, AmericanPastorsNetwork.net. And Heavenly Father, thank you that we can be together on this program today. Thank you for Scott and all that was said. And we look to you, Lord, our only Redeemer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you, Sam. Scott, thank you so much. Scott Uehlinger, retired CIA station chief, for coming on for the great insights. And thank you for listening today. Please pray for all of our ministries here in the American Pastors Network and Stand in the Gap Media. And until next time, stand in the gap for truth wherever you are. Thank you.
If you liked today's program, tell a friend. You'll also want to hear Stand in the Gap Weekend and watch the nationally syndicated Stand in the Gap TV program. We present the news of the day truthfully, carefully, and consistently from a biblical worldview and constitutional perspective. If you're hungry for the truth, visit standinthegapmedia.org to find all our programs and the stations that carry them. While you're there, be sure to download our free app and support this ministry with your best financial gift. Then join us again right here Monday through Friday for another program of Stand in the Gap Today.